Pucks with Haggs
is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 114th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe for a premium membership. Get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns usually 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal. So go to bostonsportsjournal.com. Get a membership there as well, and you can read all of my thoughts on the Bruins. Today with me, I have 2 longtime friends and colleagues and friends of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, the New England Hockey Journal's Mark Divver and Mick Colageo. Mick, please tell people where they can also find your work, my friend.
I write a Sunday column for BostonHockeyNow.com, contribute to the seasonal issues of the Hockey News, and have my own little blog called Rink Wrap that'll be coming soon to a X-Link near you.
There you go. And Mark, in the interest of equal opportunity, anything else you would like to plug for yourself here, my friend?
Well, once the Bruins season or the Providence Bruins season starts, I'll be doing my typical Providence Bruins coverage on Ringside, Rhode Island. So that's that and the New England Hockey Journal. Those are my 2 main outlets at this point.
And I got to say, Ringside, Rhode Island is one of the best takes for anybody who wants to be caught up in a very organized, quick hit sort of a way, but with also insightful commentary. It's a great combination of something that's well worth any Bruins fan's time. I lean on it.
100%. If I want to know what's going on with the Providence Bruins, Mark Divver and his writing is what I'm going to and I'm reading and to keep abreast of like what's happening down there. So thank you for mentioning that, Mark.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
For sure. All right. We got a couple of things in the news, boys. We can shoot around real quick and then we'll answer some fan questions. First of all, interesting development, I thought, the other day with a former Boston Bruin with the Columbus Blue Jackets and Mark Recchi being relieved of his duties as assistant coach with the Blue Jackets after 1 year on the job. I think a friend of his, Mike Haviland, was actually the guy that got put on staff to replace him. Used to be an assistant with, I think it was the Blackhawks way back when, but he's a long time hockey guy that's been an assistant coach for a long time. Just your thoughts maybe on Rex and, being an assistant coach. He's had a few different spots here along the way and whether like such a great hockey mind, I would love to see him in a spot where he gets either a management position or a coaching position where he really gets to show for a long period of time what he can do, because like there are very few people who are as well connected or as knowledgeable about the game as Mark Recchi, especially with the playing resume that he has.
I was reading this morning that he still has a year left on his contract, so they're still going to have to pay him. But
yep,
I think it was they had a terrible power play, and he was in charge of it. So I think you kind of connect those 2 dots, you can see why they might have reached this decision. And who knows? Maybe Dean Evison and Rex didn't get along back in the day when they were players. Who knows? But
yeah. I tend to think it has more to do with that kind of thing than anything else.
But you got to think there's got to be a spot in the NHL somewhere for Mark Recchi on someone's coaching staff. It would be a shame if I expect he'll be back, but I guess it's just a question of when.
Sometimes guys get let go because somebody else became available that the hiring person was salivating over for years. And, I mean, look at Rick Bowness. The Bruins sweep the Montreal Canadiens in the Eastern Conference, second round in 1992. They lose the conference final, also getting swept by the repeat Penguins, and Harry Sinden fires him because Brian Sutter was available, and he always loved how the Blues played under Brian Sutter. So he wanted Brian Sutter, and he wanted the way he liked the way he played. He liked the way he thought the game, and the aggressive forechecking thing was a Harry thing. He loved it. He embraced it. He was like, this is my chance to get a guy I really want here. So he went and got a guy I really wanted at the expense of a guy who just did something that the Bruins, I think, only did that one time in the history until 2009. It's amazing that can happen. Oh, I swept the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs, and I got fired. That's a unique place in history for Rick Bowness.
Absolutely. But to your point, Mark, Rex is such a knowledgeable guy, great hockey guy. I do expect he's going to pop up somewhere else in some kind of managerial or coaching position, and hope it happens sooner rather than later. And if not, I hope he enjoys the year by the pool, getting paid by the Blue Jackets to do to sip umbrella drinks and hang out with his family. So either way, it's going to work out well for him.
Wasn't he following his son and playing hockey at a certain point? Wasn't his? I don't know how many years ago that is now.
That was a few years ago, I think. Yeah,
his son has been in the transfer portal, I think, at least once. So I've lost track of where he is now.
Okay, yeah. So sometimes I wonder if these things have to do with what your availability is, your commitment is, and them wanting to push or something, and you're not available to push. I don't know. I'm just wild, irresponsible speculation on my part. But it just seems to me like for him, finding the fit has been a tricky thing. And while the Penguins for a while, welcome him back to be that whisperer in the head coach's ear, that guy with that word of wisdom at the moment where it's precisely needed to say, did you think about this? Or did you notice that? He seems like an invaluable mind, as you guys have been alluding, for this sort of, but in terms of modern day team coaching, specific assignment, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. I'm not sure where his fit really is, because he just seems to me like he's so potentially good when it comes to that voice, that little man you want standing on the shoulder of your head coach, that little voice that with a timely word. That seems to me like where he might be most valuable. And hopefully there's just other dysfunction with that Columbus power play. Let's face it, there's a lot of dysfunction all over the ice for those guys last year. And one of the reasons the Korpisalo acquisition has been widely criticized rather than hailed.
Yeah, I think with Columbus, like if you're blaming the coach solely for a power play that didn't perform with the players that they had in the roster, then I think you might be barking up the wrong tree a little bit. But, I think some of it might also be just in the last couple of years, sort of the turmoil that's been going on with Columbus and their coaching staff with, the Babcock situation and then them scrambling for coaches after that. And I think he was hired somewhere in that sort of window. And now with a new coach coming in, that like all bets can be off at that point if they want their own guys in, and that can be, a condition of their employment for coming in. So I think,
I have a hunch that the Blackhawks are going to go after him.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Judd Sirott this week named the TV play-by-play voice of the Boston Bruins on NESN, replacing Jack Edwards. I'll be honest, I hadn't really thought of Judd as a candidate. I should have, because I think he's got the institutional knowledge, having been here for a bunch of years now, and really is a great choice as far as somebody that, you can just plug and play with and come right in, and there's not going to be any speed bumps. And it's certainly he did a really good job on the radio and is deserving of that opportunity. And I think he'll have chemistry with Brick, which I think is important for whoever was going to come in, is somebody that Brick really worked well with, had respect for, like genuinely liked. And you want to hear that kind of chemistry on the air. So I think all those things came into play. But just congrats to Judd on getting that job, well deserved. Big shoes to fill with Jack and the outsized personality and the presence, the Johnny Most-like presence he had calling the Bruins for such a long time. I don't know that Judd's going to be like that and be like Jack, which is a good thing. He's going to go in and do his own thing and do what he's done very well and very successfully, over the course of his career as well. But, congrats to Judd on a well-deserved gig. One of the premium gigs in the NHL with NESN calling the Bruins games.
I think. Go ahead.
I'm curious to see how his if his call changes on TV as opposed to radio.
Yep.
But I think him and Bob Beers have done a superb job on radio for the Bruins, and I'm someone who goes back to way back to a time when not every Bruins game was on TV. And you had to listen on the radio to find out what was going on. And so I'm a lover of hockey on the radio. And, not to veer off topic here, but that's dying a little bit. I don't think, some teams have a simulcast, TV and radio. In the American League, some teams like the Providence Bruins don't even have radio. Yeah. So it's good to see a veteran radio guy like Judd get this job. I think he deserves it. It's not surprising that Nesson didn't go far to find the replacement for Jack. But like you said, big shoes to fill.
I think one of the things that he and Bob Beers really caught fire and had a great chemistry because Judd is a little laid back for a radio guy, which makes me think that maybe he's going to be an easy transition to television because you have the picture and you don't need as many words, whereas we all know on radio, you're all the viewer, the listener has. But Beersy would chime in little snippets, a word here, 3 words there, and even in the midst of the play-by-play, they somehow managed to do this, and it was so smooth. And I thought right after, Judd got good in a hurry. He had been the studio analyst for the Blackhawks games, so he understands the intricacies of all of this very, very well. And he knows how to do either job very well. And I just thought that once he and Beers found that chemistry, they were so good that this almost makes me sad. but I'm happy for Judd that he makes the leap because, like Mark, I love hockey on the radio. The only problem is that I do see it as a thing that's it's sort of drying up. I kind of feel like it's nearly extinct, sort of when you see what happened with Chuck Caton and the Carolina Hurricanes a few years back, and you wonder what exactly is going to go happen with, as long as the advertising dollars are there and there can be radio flagships, then that's going to be a thing. I don't know in hockey's case. People are always looking for a place to watch the game. I don't know too many people who listen on the radio anymore. Nobody ever talks about it. And Mark and I are dinosaurs. So it was funny. We spent the whole summer wondering who's going to be the Bruins' new TV announcer, and it turns out we should have been wondering who's going to be the new radio announcer. So I hope it's that college kid that did the games on Nesson, college games on Nesson. I think he called the 2 BCBU games and probably a bunch of others that I missed. A young fella, baby-faced kid, but just an outstanding play-by-play guy. And I can't remember his name, but Tyler he's going to be terrific, whatever he does. What?
I think it's Tyler Murray you're referring to.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I'm thinking of the right guy then. I think he's going to be terrific at whatever he does. So I don't know who gets this gig, but as far as local homegrown guys, this is as good as I've heard in a long time.
Well, and I think Ryan Johnston's definitely somebody you got to consider for that as well. He's been here a long time. He's done tons of play-by-play, college, AHL. Has filled in the NHL as well at times when they need a play-by-play guy for the Bruins. So, and he's already an employee at 98.5 and does, tons of fill-in hosting work for them, hosts the hockey show, like all that stuff. So I think he's a guy that I would look at as a strong candidate that deserves.
And you probably lose him if he doesn't get it now. He'd probably lose him, right? So it would be a smart move to hire him.
I think at a certain
because he's great in that station in an overall way.
I think at a certain point, it behooves you to reward the people that have paid their dues and that have, done a really good job for a really long time and kind of have, deserved that shot. And I think, Ryan Johnston epitomizes that sort of situation at this point. But it's to your point, there's a lot of very talented play-by-play guys out there. There's more coming out every single year. And, you've got to balance all of that between, like, do you have a potential, like, star here that you think could, to your point about radio kind of dying, that could, bring ears to the radio broadcast and could really, energize people to listen a little bit more on the radio. Do I think it's ever going to become a situation like it was with the Celtics when I was a kid in the 80s, where you would turn down the TV telecast and listen to most on the radio and listen to his broadcast and just not even listen to the TV broadcast? I don't know.
I used to do that with Don when Don Earl did the Bruins
Me too.
from the late 60s through 1970, 71, so I could hear Bob Wilson.
Yep.
But Fred Cusick actually was the radio guy the year the Bruins won the Cup, and Bob Orr. One of the greatest calls that very few people know is Bobby Orr's overtime goal to win the Stanley Cup in Mother's Day 1970 with Fred Cusick and Johnny Pearson on the radio. It's fantastic, and you can YouTube it. And it's something I didn't know for a long, long time. And Bob Wilson told me a great story. Dan Kelly, of course, the St. Louis Blues announcer on KMOX, he called that game because he called all the games for CBS. Whenever it was game of the week, Sunday afternoons, the NHL. And so Dan Kelly was like the out-of-town national broadcaster, the best one I ever heard. I love listening to Dan Kelly do hockey games, any kind, international, NHL. So Dan Kelly, KMOX decides when Bob Wilson left Boston and was on KMOX doing the Blues radio when Dan Kelly was their TV guy. So when the Blues played the Bruins in the final, KMOX decided to simulcast Dan Kelly on CBS over KMOX airwaves. Therefore, Bob Wilson was without a gig when the Bruins won the Cup in 1970. He was in St. Louis and unable to call it. Very similar to the frustration that the local guys get these days when they're booted after the first round of the playoffs.
Yes.
And everything goes national for the second round.
Or Jack would lose a Nesson game, Bruins Canadians, like at the height of the rivalry or something like that. Yes.
I mean, seeing what? I mean, there should be like a spy cam on him watching the game at home and watching him bounce off the walls. But Bob Wilson did come back. In the 71-72 season, the Bruins moved on from Don Earl and went to his incredible homer. He only exceeded by himself with the Flyers in the subsequent years working with Gene Hart down in Philly and WCAU. And so Don Earl, the fateful 1974 Game 2 that the Flyers tie up with Perrant out of the net, and then Bobby Clark wins it in overtime. Don Earl he and Gene Hart are at the mic for this game. And they had bigger homers than Don Earl ever was with the Bruins on 38, which is incredible to say, but it was true. So they were right up there with Johnny Most when it comes to homerism. And I'll say, and then since this is a very odd opportunity, Bob Wilson got his big chance in 72 when the Bruins won it in New York because Fred Cusick and Johnny had gone to TV 38. So Bob Wilson came back from St. Louis and was on BZ when the Bruins won the Cup in 72. And so the opener on 98.5, you hear Dan Kelly's call of Bobby Orr scoring. Then you hear Bob Wilson counting down the seconds in Madison Square Garden. 2 seconds, 1 second, it's over. The Bruins have won the Stanley Cup. So that's what Orr bends over, picks up the puck, and he and Cheever's doing airborne hug. It's just it was. I was in the Garden 2 nights earlier. I had slept up for tickets. I could go on for hours, as you know, so I don't want to let the show get away from us here. But I do want to just say one other thing here. Johnny Most, I'm so glad I got to meet him around 94. Yeah. He was in a wheelchair and he was in rough shape. But I was so glad I got to tell him this because I always felt like he was the most underrated radio play-by-play guys ever because he was so known. Oh, now Detroit's, coming out. Mustard and Relish are checking into the game, He hated the Pistons so much. And his voice changed over time. He was like Bob Dylan as a broadcaster. He's like there was Johnny Most falsetto excitement in the 60s and the Bill Russell, Sam Jones era. And then it changes a little in the 70s, changes a lot in the 80s, and so each decade there was like a different Johnny Most voice. And because, you can see the cigs are burning while he's calling the game. And but I thought his rhythm, when I'm driving in the car and I want to hear the Celtics for a chunk of the game when I'm in the car, I loved his rhythm. And my own broadcast opportunities early in my career, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the next Bob Wilson. I got chances to do some games and some of them more hoop than hockey in the beginning. And I found myself wanting to do Johnny Most stuff, like his rhythm for calling the dark that part that gets you all the way through. They just listen to the rhythm of the ball up and down the court. And I just love listening to him do games. He's going to always be known. It's kind of like the Beatles. They're always going to be known for Revolution, Hey Jude, Imagine. But it's that middle stuff that made them who they were. And that's what I loved about Johnny most in his rhythm for calling a game. And I finally got to meet him and tell him that. And he got a tear in his eye, and I got one in mine. I was so excited to finally meet him and tell him that, because I always felt that way. Very gratifying moment as far as like when you get to brush up against people that you really admire for how they worked.
That's pretty cool. No, that's great. That's a good story, Mick. And I remember, like, I never even got to talk to Johnny most, but I remember just walking by him once when I was a kid at the Garden during the Celtics game and feeling like I saw like one of the most important guys in the world, walking around. You know what I mean? Like that was like, and it was funny seeing him because he was obviously an old man, a really old man by that point, just like hunched over with the, the cigars and everything. Like he was, or the cigarettes, I should say. Like he was, it was interesting. And it was like, I'm glad I grew up sort of, because you don't see that many radio people like that anymore, radio broadcasters that are kind of larger than life like that. They're not, there's not as to what you both said previously, there's not many of those guys anymore, if there are any at all. And it's really,
it's a stepping stone job.
It is. And I feel lucky to have been, a kid when one of them was, having some of the greatest moments of their careers with those great Celtics teams in the 80s, and kind of cementing like who he was as a play-by-play guy and his sort of legendary status.
Kudos to the Bruins for naming the booths.
Yeah.
Up on floor 9.
It was such a different world for play-by-play guys back then. Can you imagine Johnny Most trying to do the commercial drop-ins that they do now?
No.
Every time there's a whistle? I mean, it would have been classic.
I just did this thing for my siblings. I have birthdays in my life this month. My brother turned 70 yesterday. My baby sister turns 60 on the 20th, and we're having a big party up there. And I'm trying to get this. I'm hoping I'll have it in time. But I took all our home movies, our 8mm from the 60s, and I shipped them off to a company and had them send me back. They're all in the cloud now. And there's actually me at Yankee Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, the Yankees' former home for spring training. And I found a random empty beer can up in the press box. And I'm there. There's no sound to this, but I'm there looking into the camera and like I'm doing one of those live advertisements, they'll live read for radio. That was my dream.
I just missed I missed it at least by a good 10 years, 5 to 10 years, the era of alcohol being in the press boxes after games were over and the party time that would ensue after everybody got done writing or while they were still writing. Who knows what the hell was going on? Like you still saw some of it at the old Yankee Stadium when you would go there, and they had like a bar downstairs like that the writers would go to after they were done writing.
I only made it there once.
Yeah. But it was not like the stories I had heard back in the heyday, which was probably not the greatest thing in the world, was those guys getting all liquored up and then driving home after they'd made deadline and written their stories. But that's another story for another day. Let's answer some fan questions here, get back to the Bruins. But congrats, Judd Sirott, on getting the job. Well deserved, and good luck with it. And look forward to hearing you on SN. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. With the summer games going on right now, with Team USA racking up gold medals, now is one of the best times ever to get involved with Prize Picks. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than and 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000, whether you're going with summer games, whether you're going with women's basketball, whether you're going with baseball. You can go in all kinds of different directions here. If you're looking for promotions, then PrizePicks has you covered. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to helping your lineup hit or getting your entry fee back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays, there is plenty on PrizePicks to get bang for your hard-earned buck. I made my first $10 deposit and received an instant $10 bonus. If you have the skill, you can play for a shot at turning your 10 into 1,000. If it's fun and pretty simple, download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, this is from Dogs Cheese on Twitter. Who knows what is actually going on in the Swayman discussions? Is he going to sit out? Eventually his leverage goes away at some point. His value has a cap since he hasn't been the main guy for a full season. Bruins will have a cap they are willing to pay. Mark, I think I've talked about this with Mick a bunch, the Jeremy Swayman stuff. I don't know how much we've talked about it. I don't expect anything to happen anytime soon. I would expect something, if it's going to happen, is going to happen at the start of training camp. I don't think there's any urgency right now. Clearly, both sides would like to get it done, but I don't think clearly there's not common ground, or it would have gotten done right now, and they're not at the same landing spot. But I think this isn't going to move until there's a real sort of natural deadline, which would be the start of training camp and when you start actually missing work. And I think that's when the urgency is going to pick up. But at this point, still not tremendously worried, even though I would say that, Swayman's agent, I guess, he represents Torrey Krug, represents a bunch of other guys. He does have a somewhat of a track record of really trying to get every last dollar for his client and getting big deals. So, which every agent does. So I'm sure they're asking for a lot, and the Bruins look at it and say, hey, there's not a lot of comparables here to give him what you're asking for. Like, why should we do that? Which is kind of a staple in contract negotiations. Obviously, they want to sign him. They want him to be happy. But I think it's problematic if you give somebody that's never played more than, 44 games in the NHL in a season some gigantic deal, sight unseen, even though he's not sight unseen, but unseen as a guy that, could shoulder a 60-game plus workload and be your number one guy before you actually see it. That's what makes this, I think, a difficult negotiation.
Yeah, and it's hard to say from the outside what the sweet spot is, and how far away are they from reaching it. I think both sides have done a pretty good job of keeping things under wraps in terms of where they are, where they want to be. But the longer it goes, we still got a month to go or 5 weeks, I guess, till training camp. So there's time, but you'd like to see it wrapped up, and you can only hope that both sides are, in communication on a regular basis here, working on it, not just saying, the hell with it, we'll figure it out in, September, the second week of September. But we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So
I tend to think that his agent's got to be saying, here's your two comparables, Pasternak and McAvoy. You went and both of these guys were developing players when you gave them the mother load. You gave them what is standard for them to be at the top of their position in the league, and they were still working on it when you gave it to them. So how is it that my guy proves himself? You go to him in the playoffs, he plays great in the playoffs, and now he's clearly your clear-cut choice for number one, and you still how do you not give him the career contract that McAvoy got, that Pasternak got? Even if it might not even be, and it's not going to be as much as either one of those guys. How can you deny it? I think that's going to be the argument coming from the other side.
I would take issue with the Pasternak one. Like, he was on course for a 50-goal season when the COVID season was shortened. Like,
that
he put up
correct.
Huge numbers. He'd put up huge numbers
hit it
like that. Like, he'd already had well-established track record of getting paid before he got the money that he got. McAvoy maybe a little bit more. I don't see how Swayman's off, though. I don't see how Swayman hasn't done everything that's asked of him and more. Yeah, but that's not. But I know, but that's not how contract negotiations work. Like, that's not how it works when the GM and the agent go back and forth and trade numbers and have these discussions. Like, it's about the position. It's like real estate. It's about properties and saying this comparable property to this comparable property. This is why we're asking this much for it, and this is what we're going to get. And ultimately, it comes down to like being willing to pay that and finding somebody that will give you the money for that. But when you're asking for a certain amount, it comes down to comparables with guys that are like you and playing in the NHL. And there is no comparable for Jeremy Swayman that got $8 million a year. There just isn't. Like, so there's got to be pressure, I would think, on the Bruins to not overextend and overspend and create a situation where you're setting a precedent where a guy that's never even played 50 games in the NHL, never won the Vezina, never been a Vezina finalist, has really like got a small track record as far as that goes in his goaltending career. We all know he's going to be an excellent goalie. I have full belief he's going to be a number one goalie. The playoffs were great. It was a month. That's it. But you're going to want to secure him and make him happy because he's kind of shown that he can be a playoff goalie, and there's only so many of those guys out there. But like, you have to actually like show a goalie that is getting paid 8 years, 64, or whatever it is you're asking for. Maybe they're asking for more than that. Who knows? But you actually have to produce a goalie that has his comparable numbers to him to get paid like that. Otherwise, they're opening the door for any goalie in the league that was a backup before they establish themselves as a starter that has decent numbers to say, I should be getting $8 million a year. And that is going to like blow the goalie contracts through the roof. It's going to create a precedent that's going to be bad for the entire league. And I think there's a lot of wariness of doing that.
I feel like they've already blown this out of the water all the way around the league with guys getting the money before they get the leverage to get the money. Guys who are not arbitration eligible in their first group two are getting career contracts. It's happening all over the place.
Getting a huge deal in Minnesota.
Oh, I just feel like there's been a million of these in the league. I feel like the old structure of you work your way up to this in the building blocks has been blown out of the water as soon as guys it seems to be it's already been replaced over the last 5 years by an approach that GMs say, here's our guy. Let's sign him. Let's lock him up. Do it before inflation makes us pay way more. That's what they do. And I feel like that's a preemptive strike. That way they get them knowing that the league's got new revenue streams and they're going to have all kinds of marketing with things are going to be like as if a fan had a GoPro on sitting on the bench. There's going to be all kinds of revenue coming into hockey that isn't there right now in a very short time because of technology. So there's a philosophy that's been out there the last few years where teams are trying to identify guys who don't have the leverage to hold the hammer over the GM's head, and they still pay them. They get it early. Pasta got it early. McAvoy got it early. They didn't have the leverage that the guys have when they usually get those contracts. When you go back to the economics of a smaller cap, This is and it's happened during the flat cap era, which reinforces it even more. Now we're after the flat cap era. So how the heck? I mean, I'm just having a hard time seeing how the Bruins can throw these structured things at the Swayman camp and expect them to go, yeah, I see your point. And I don't think they see the point. That's all.
All right.
I don't think they do. I'm not saying I agree with anybody here. I didn't just take a side.
That was our weekly Jeremy Swayman segment until he signs his contract right there. Let's move on to another subject. And this is from my Boston Sports Journal Q&A. I get some great questions out of there. This is from SJM1613 on there. There's a couple questions. And Mark, I guess we'll start with you on this one. Who will play more games for the Bruins this year out of Riley Duran, Georgi Merkulov, and Fabian Lysell?
Ooh.
I think I would say Fabian Lysell. I think that's a slam dunk.
Yeah, isn't this the guy they want to win that job? Like all things being equal.
Well, to win that job, they're practically handing it to him.
Right.
So never mind win it.
Right.
The talk out of development camp and from Don Sweeney, this is the guy. This is his. This is what they want from him in his third year as a pro. It's time. Now, whether he goes out and scores 10 goals or whether he scores 20 goals, I think he's going to get his chance. And, what he does with it is up to him. And the coaching staff will figure out what his best role would be. Is it up in the lineup? Is it sort of a break in the bottom six, like so many guys have had to do over the years? But it's up to him to show up for camp, in a month or so, and be ready, and not fall into the kind of the habits maybe that have drawn some negative attention, since he's been in Providence. And he's another year older. This should be his time to step in there in the lineup. First round pick, a guy they've promoted, kind of lived with his growing pains as a young player, and now it's time for him to not put up and shut up, but put up,
Right.
and take another step up the ladder. It doesn't mean there's not going to be bumps in the road, maybe healthy scratches along the way, and like so many
Trade
players
requests.
face.
But you're right. It's time for them to start yielding results for the investment they made in him as a first-round pick. And it's what Bruce Cassidy, and I've mentioned this a couple times, it's what Bruce Cassidy used to call the NHL Lion King circle of life, that Jake DeBrusk moves on because you don't want to pay him that kind of money anymore. Former first-round pick, good offensive player, top six staple. And in the circle of life in the NHL, your prospect that is in that spot and you invested in the first round when he's that age, when he's 21, 22, had a few years in the AHL, that's kind of like the circle of life for the NHL team. Is DeBrusk moves on, you have this guy to, presumably and theoretically fill in and start to develop as a replacement to that player and the production and some of the stuff that he brought. And obviously they hope that Fabian Lysell can be that guy. And I agree. I think in a lot of ways, this shakes out to put all the ducks in a row and all the pieces in place for him, to win a job, to potentially be that guy that plays with Coyle and Marchand at points. But you're right. I think it's going to be like it was last year for Patra and Beecher and Lowry under Jim Montgomery, where there was ups and downs, and there were, times where they got less ice time and more ice time, maybe get sent down to Providence a few times. And there were certainly lessons to be learned in the rookie season, especially when you're, being counted on to play a pretty impactful role. And I would expect it's going to be the same with Lysell and with these other young players too. But I would expect that he's going to get the most ice time of those young guys. It'll be interesting to see what kind of looks Merkulov and Duran get as well. Mick, what do you think as far as games played here for those three players?
Yeah, two things I'm thinking. One is there's going to be a major revolving door at second line right wing, and that may bleed into third line right wing. There'll be a revolving door on that side of the ice behind Pasta. It'll be on the other hand, the one way I can marry what you guys said, because I find myself agreeing with you about Lysell, is that whereas anybody else who goes over there for 2 or 3 or 4 games has to prove that they're a solution, he has to prove that he's not. And in as much as Don Sweeney likes to throw hurdles in a human form in front of his prospects as a necessary piece of the development process, and we may see one more. We may see a camp tryout, a right shot camp tryout. We could see that. Just one more person there standing in the way to bring out the competitiveness of the situation and guys fighting for NHL careers. But I do think at the end of the day, Lysell has to prove that he's not ready for this, whereas anybody else who goes in there for this smidge is going to have to prove that they are a good solution. And then still, the second it goes anywhere sideways, it's going to be Lysell time again, or somebody else's chance. It's so I think that's just they need him. They want him to be the winner of this, but there is going to be quite a musical chairs thing going on there.
No, I agree. And it's probably going to be like that until the trade deadline, where it'll be like guys getting different looks. And we all know Jim Montgomery changes around his combinations and his forwards a lot anyway. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different looks. Mark, having been around him quite a bit the last few years, having talked to a lot of the coaches down there over the last few years while he's been there, what's your sort of confidence level that he's going to be able, and he's in the right spot, right time, like in his career and his development path, the right place, the right time to seize sort of the opportunity that he's probably going to get in training camp?
Well, I think there's going to be bumps in the road. There's no doubt about it. And, I think his maturity, as a person and as a player is going to be important here. The ability to roll with the punches here. If you get taken off the second line and you're on the fourth line all of a sudden, roll with it. Do your best. Continue to work and bring your A game. No sulking. No sulking. I think that's that kind of mentality has bitten him a little bit in his first 2 years in Providence. When things aren't going his way, maybe a tendency to be upset about it and to let it show in his play. It's one thing to be upset about it, but it's another thing to let it show in your play in a negative way. So he's got to be that more mature youngster that rolls with it when things don't go his way, because there's going to be times when it doesn't go his way.
Yeah, I've yet.
Well, quick question from Mark about Lysell. He's a pretty verbal player out there. He likes to get into it with opponents. He's pretty smart ass out on the ice, yapping back and forth kind of thing. Do you think that helps him or that distracts him?
I don't think that helps him. I don't think anybody he yaps at is in the least bit afraid of what he might bring. He's not a big kid. I don't think he projects as a tough guy. So he's better off just keeping his mouth shut.
Yeah.
We'll see how it works when he's with the Bruins uniform.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I can tell you one thing, Mark. I have yet to meet a hockey coach alive that likes the sulking or the bad body language and the bad reactions to adversity. So, that's always a warning sign.
Absolutely.
And bad sign whenever a coach sees that in a player. And if that's one of your impressions of somebody pretty early, it's hard to shake that too. Once you start acting that way, even though it's a sign of immaturity and maybe a young player, but you got to get rid of that pretty quick if you're going to be at the NHL level. Second part to that question: if Brandon Bussi shows well in camp, do you see the Bruins trading Korpisalo or potentially demoting him to Providence? Mark, your read on that situation with Bussi and how that might play out at the start of this season?
Depending on what happens in camp, I could see Bussi starting the year as the number 2 in Boston. I could see that. The Bruins can bury Korpisalo's money in the American League for a while, see what happens. Can Bussi, let's face it, he hasn't played an NHL game yet. So throwing him in as the number 2 is it remains to be seen if he can do that. All signs point to him being able to do that, to being a good number 2 at the NHL level. Korpisalo, I mean, let's see what he does in camp. Does he get his game on track? Is he more the guy that had some good stretches in the NHL in the past in his career, or is he the guy who was a disaster last year?
Right.
So I could see him having to start in Providence and kind of get his game back. So
he can play a lot?
Yeah, he can play a lot. And see what happens with Bussi. I have a hard time believing that if they tried to send Bussi to Providence, that a team would not snatch him up on waivers.
Right.
Maybe I'm crazy, but because goalies, I mean, this is something we go through every year, right? Oh, they might lose them on waivers. They never do. These guys get sent down, and for the most part, they sail right through. But to me, the promise that Bussi has shown in his first 2 years, I got to think that a team would snag him. A team that, not a contending team, but maybe it's a building team.
A team that needs
right.
goalie help too. A building team that doesn't have a great goalie situation. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this kid, the way he battles and the way he conducts himself, I think he has a future in the NHL. Whether it's with the Bruins, I guess we'll see. But I could see them starting him in Boston at the beginning of the year and kind of playing it out, seeing what happens.
Mick?
I think Mark's brought up a great point. I've assumed all along that Korpisalo is going to be in the situation as the number 2, for the 1A, even if depending on how camp goes. And but with the long projection that Swayman's their guy, of course. But you farm up a guy like Bussy, and it turns out so well that you hate like heck to see him just be lost for nothing. Poof, gone. So Mark's scenario makes some sense. I just can't think of situations very much where the Bruins didn't do this unless they thought a player was all washed up. Wasn't ever going to be the player he once was or the player they thought it'd be. So that would be kind of like new ground for me to think of the Bruins doing it that way, even though it makes a lot of sense in some ways. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I don't really. It makes me eager for camp. It makes me eager to see Korpisalo once goalie Bob's gotten a hold of him. And the Bruins system. How much will the Bruins system help him? A good environment.
It might be a little different from what we typically see, but like to Mark's point, I think part of the reason you didn't see that is because they weren't really that worried about losing those players in waivers. And I think this is a player you legitimately would have some concern. Like that really complicates the whole situation that where he is contractually, that you'd have to put him on waivers. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time, the Red Sox, Fenway Park. Jarren Duran putting on a show at the MLB All-Star Game. So you may want to dig into your pocket and actually spend some money on some Red Sox tickets based on Jarren Duran and the season he's having. This is one of those seasons where I think you're going to want to watch because he's in the middle of putting something together pretty special. You're going to say you were in the stands and you saw Jarren Duran do something crazy when you were actually watching one of the games at Fenway. So go to Game Time. Last minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of getting Red Sox tickets at Fenway this summer with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, create the account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that would probably be the smartest way to do it, Mark, to retain the asset and see if he can do it. If he plays great and Swayman's playing great and everything's going well, why would you even need to mess with that? And obviously you're probably going to be dealing with an unhappy camper in Korpisalo and Providence at some point if that's the case. But you'll deal with that if you have to deal with that. And, there's not much you can really do at this point.
In terms of rehabilitating his game, it might not be, I suspect it won't be just he makes an adjustment or two here in camp and then bingo, he's all set. I suspect it'll be something that might take some time.
Yeah.
And whether that's in the American League or, ideally he'd make his adjustment and do his, get it back on track, make his mistakes in the American League, not in the National League. So, I don't think it's, a situation where you flip the switch and he's back where he was, say, for stretches in L.A. Right off the bat.
Yeah.
But, that'll be something to watch in camp, that progression to see where he ends up, how long it takes, and if he even can get his game back on track. Who knows? We don't.
Right.
That's not a lock to happen.
No.
So
no.
It'll be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially with the money that's being invested in him too, and the term that you have, you want to make sure you're getting value for that at the NHL level if you're putting him in that position. And goaltending is such an important thing, and it's going to be even more important because of what we talked about before with Swayman never having played 60 games in the NHL, having played a large number of games as a number one guy. You're going to want another guy that's capable of playing if there's any kind of an adjustment period for him to a heavier workload, and to be in the guy that's paid a huge amount of money with all these expectations. I think all these things Swayman is going to coast through, and he's built to handle all this stuff. And I think he's the real deal. But you don't know until somebody goes out there and actually does it when it comes to that kind of workload and being the guy when he's been with Ullmark the last few years. All right. One more, Mark, real quick, and then we'll go. Would you give your money to a guy who can't get past Florida or set a new record for too many men in the ice penalties in only 2 rounds of the playoffs? Jim Montgomery is not good at putting lines together, and for that matter, keeping them together to get consistency. So I know not if it doesn't change, and he's speaking about extending Jim Montgomery and giving him a contract before the season starts. The situation with Jim Montgomery is really interesting. I believe it was a 3-year deal that he signed, so he's coming into his last year. Really interesting if he doesn't get signed to an extension in training camp before the season starts, and he goes into this final season without contract certainty. Even more so with some of the changes to the coaching staff, with Joe Sacco getting a promotion, with Jay Leach being put on the staff when he was, I think, one of the candidates or one of the guys they looked at for the head coaching job when they hired Jim Montgomery. Just your thoughts on where Jim Montgomery's at, what he's done. Obviously great during the regular season, had 2 very good regular seasons. The playoffs, not as great, but they also lost to a Florida team that I think was better than them in both instances, even though the first time around that was arguably was not better than them. And I think that was a big disappointment. But, the track record is mixed, very mixed. To put it as best as you can in the playoffs. Just your thoughts on Montgomery and the situation right now with him.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. Because clearly the postseason hasn't turned out the way that management and certainly not the fans have thought it should.
Yep.
I don't know. If Pasta doesn't score in overtime against the Leafs in that Game 7 and they lose, is Monty? I mean, do they cut bait at that point? I don't know, but I think it's fair to wonder.
Yep.
And going into the season, I don't know. I think you wait and see. I think that's what you do.
Yep.
Certainly it won't make Monty very comfortable, but
yep.
I think it seems like something Don Sweeney would do, maybe even right up until the end, all season, and see what happens in the playoffs. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if Don Sweeney adopted that strategy.
Yep.
Okay, we've seen what you can do in the regular season, and that's great, but now we want more in the playoffs. I think that's a fair ask. So, yep. That will be something that will it be a cloud, or will it be a dark cloud over the team throughout the season? I don't know. I guess it depends on what kind of start they get off to and where they are in the standings. But certainly it's a question that will be on a lot of people's minds as we go here. What do they do? Do they extend him? Do they give him 3 more years? Do they extend him a couple of years, 1 year? I mean, that's all fair game to speculate on. But like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if Don Sweeney said, you know what, we're going to play this out and see where we are at the end of the year before we decide, on a new contract for Monty.
And he did that with Claude, right? And when they put Bruce on his staff that last year, and it was there was a lot of signs pointing towards there may be a change coming, and you wonder if this is sort of like a similar situation that's that's happening right now, especially with, like you said, if there are times where they like struggle during the regular season, and if they're not responding the way they did last year, if Monty like bag skates them or something like that, and is he more hesitant to do stuff like that if he's in the last year of his deal, worried about like a player's revolt or anything there's a lot of dynamics at play when you're a lame duck coach and you don't have contract security going into a season like that.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got a reputation as a player's coach. I think he's a popular guy in the room, because he's a positive guy for the most part. I think he coaches the way he wanted to be coached when he was a player, where it emphasized the positive, But, at some point during the season, maybe the Bruins will be in a little bit of a lull, and somebody will, might be a TV guy, might be a radio guy, will speculate that, geez, has he lost the room? Has he lost the room? And, that will be debated. But that's another interesting one, and kind of an overarching storyline hanging over the season as we go here. The status of Monty's contract. Have there been talks? Have there not been talks? What's going to happen? So we'll wait and see on that one.
Yes, we will. It's going to be an interesting training camp with all these things kind of swirling about. It's much more interesting, I think, than the last couple of years. Should be fun. All right, Mark, thank you very much. Mick and his tree cutters, thank you very much for joining us as well. We really appreciated that. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Joe.
Always a pleasure on my end, too, my friend. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you at the rink.